So good afternoon, everybody. A very warm welcome to Bolton Priory and to our annual St. Cuthbert's Lecture. Thank you very much for coming. It's my great pleasure to welcome today the very Reverend Catherine Ogle, who has had a very distinguished career in the church. But before that, she started her degree in textile design at the University of Leeds. So she was brought up in a village outside Cambridge and went to Leeds University to study textile design. She was called to the ministry in her 20s and went to Westcott House in Cambridge, which is a sort of Cambridge equivalent of Cuddesdon, middle of the road Anglican Centrist College. She served her curacy as a deacon in South Leeds and was then seconded to BBC Radio Leeds. She was one of the first women to be ordained as a priest in the Church of England. And in 1994, she became Vicar of Woolley with West Breton in the Wakefield Diocese, and then served as Vicar of Huddersfield for 10 years before moving to cathedral ministry. She was first of all Dean of Birmingham, and then moved to be Dean of Winchester Cathedral, which is where I first met Catherine, because I preached there on Remembrance Sunday a few years ago. So that's where we met. She's now retired and lives in Ilkley, and has now returned to her textile roots, doing more into looking at art, which is from when she first came. She's also on Radio 2's Pause for Thought, if you think the lecture is so good and you'd like to listen to her again. So without further ado, Catherine, I hand over to you. And let's hope we can get it's gone off again, so could you ping it?
Has that come on?
No, keep going. It's turned itself off. There we are. We're on. Lovely. I'll hand over to you.
Well, good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to have been invited to deliver the St. Cuthbert Lecture this year. Thank you so much to the Rector for asking me. I do hope that you're going to enjoy it. I feel really bad taking you away from the sunshine today. The first day you could have gone out in your gardens, but you're here. Thank you very much, and I hope that you'll find something of interest. It's also very exciting because I think this is the first time we're using the new sound system. Can you all hear me? Would you like me to speak up? Oh, I can. Fine, okay. Okay, thank you. And my husband's at the back and he's promised to raise his hand if he can't hear me. So that's the backup. But if any of you can't hear me, raise your hand and I'll take it as a sign. Sacred or scandalous, visual art and the church, and why it matters. Oh, here we are. That's how I do it. English parish churches and cathedrals make up a great part of the nation's built heritage. These are places that hold local memories and traditions and national history. These are community spaces belonging to us all, and above all, they are sacred houses of Christian prayer where faith is taught and lived out. Churches and cathedrals are also places of art and craft where glass and wood and stone, paint and textiles are all worked with skill, interacting with the light and offering the very best to God. This afternoon I'll be talking about how the visual arts have always been central to the mission of the Christian church, and yet how there has also been a history of profound conflict concerning visual art in the church. And conflict continues to the present day. You may remember that back last October, an art installation entitled Heros was shown at Canterbury Cathedral. The exhibition was presented as graffiti on the ancient walls of the cathedral. Hear Us provoked an enormous international response, much of it hostile and angry, revealing vividly the potency of interventions into our cathedrals and churches, and how what happened in that sacred space mattered very much to many people. There are many ways in which art can provide controversy and division in the church, and we'll take a look at some of those this afternoon. We'll consider that Canterbury graffiti and some other visual art commissions in cathedrals to explore their purpose and motivation and why they matter. But let's start by looking back. Christians have always used pictures as well as words to communicate and teach the faith. Visual art has always played a vital part in the transmission of the gospel to all nations. Famously, when Pope Gregory sought to evangelize England in the 6th century, his monks came here from Rome armed with illuminated manuscripts of the Bible. And the spread of Christianity in these islands was marked by stone crosses erected in public places, often highly decorated. As churches were built here and Christianity spread here and across Europe, the churches were adorned with mosaics and paintings, sculptures, textiles, and stained glass. And before people could read, before literacy was widespread, the stories and tenets of faith were communicated visually. The visual arts can teach faith, and they can also convey profound meaning. There are libraries of books written by philosophers about art and meaning. However, this afternoon, I'd like just to very simply draw your attention to two ways in which meaning may be conveyed and received by us when we look at art. And it may be useful as we explore our subject later. The first is meaning gained through revelation. This is where an artist seeks to convey to us how he or she is seeing something or understanding something. They are offering the viewer some kind of revelation, and the viewer may see this and respond to it. We may respond to the artist's vision, what they've seen or perceived. And so their vision will open our eyes, and also sometimes our hearts and souls as well. Great art is revelatory and can expand our imagination to the glorious possibilities of God's world. Some of you will recognize this, I'm sure. For illustration, this fresco is of the Annunciation, where the angel Gabriel comes to tell Mary the good news that she will bear God's Son. It's in Florence, in the monastery of San Marco, and it's by Fra Angelico. I wonder if any of you have ever seen these frescoes. They are available for the public to see in Florence. The artist was a Dominican friar, and he is giving his viewers a revelation of how he sees the event of the Annunciation. He isn't trying to paint Mary in an ancient village in Palestine. Look where she is. That's some Italian palace, isn't it? With a lovely Italian garden. The artist is trying to paint a revelation to us that the experience of God's love is both contemporary and timeless. And he shares that revelation with us. So revelation is one way of conveying meaning. Another way is through resonance. That is, when a connection is made for the viewer through their feelings or experiences, through their knowledge or imaginations. Resonance with a work of art can help us feel connection beyond ourselves. If I can just talk personally, for me, the revelation and resonance here in this work by Fra Angelico is the tenderness and the courtesy of the encounter. The angel is actually lower than Mary herself. It's an extraordinarily gentle revelation of God's transforming love from a Dominican friar artist across 700 years to me and to you too, I hope. If a work of art moves you, it may be that it holds these two qualities of revelation and resonance. The visual arts have played a vital part in the life of the church, spreading the gospel and its meaning, capturing hearts and minds. But controversy and disagreement have never been far away. The cross of Christ is now the preeminent symbol of worldwide Christianity, but the cross itself was once problematic, and it was not instantly adopted by the early church. Early believers lived as a minority in a hostile context of Roman Empire. Christianity was regarded as an illegal superstition. Under Emperor Nero in the 1st century AD, Christians were accused of the most terrible sorts of crimes. They were persecuted and sometimes killed. In the catacombs of Rome, where Christians were buried in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, we can see various early symbols of Christianity there, but no cross, though one may be hidden in this carving of fish, an ancient Christian symbol, with an anchor. This may be a disguised cross, this anchor, but there is no unambiguous cross. Christians simply could not take the risk of being openly associated with anything criminal or the means of death for a criminal. The turning point for the cross came with the conversion of Emperor Constantine in 312 AD and the legalization of the Christian faith in 313 AD. The legend goes that Constantine learnt in a dream that his armies would conquer in battle if they fought under the banner of the cross. And here you can see, from a few years later in AD 350, a Roman coin where the soldier on the right has a Christian symbol on his banner. As Christianity became the primary religion of the Roman Empire, the cross could also take its place as the symbol of Christianity. But a much more enduring controversy for the visual image, which has occurred throughout the centuries, comes from Scripture and from the interpretation of the second great commandment from the book of Exodus in the Old Testament, which reads, I'm sure you know this off by heart, you shall not make yourself any idol or graven image, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I am the Lord your God, a jealous God. Now, this commandment is interpreted differently. For the Jewish faith, generally, the depiction of God and humanity is forbidden. Christianity has tended to take a different attitude, with a distinction between making an idol, which is acceptable, making an image, which is acceptable, but distinguishing this from worshipping an image, which is absolutely unacceptable. So we do not worship idols, but we may make images. But this distinction in interpreting the commandment has been controversial and was so for the early church. St. Augustine of Hippo, who was a hugely influential theologian and bishop from North Africa in the 4th century, was an early champion of the visual arts. And according to Augustine, God is the original artist. God is the artist. God is the source of beauty and order. The purpose of earthly art is to lead restless and hungry human souls back to God. So art has a really important purpose of leading us back to God. But even Augustine had some concerns about it. Augustine wrote that for those people who are really spiritual, art may be a distraction and an entrapment of the eyes. They were worried about the lure of the senses. Uneasiness about the second commandment and the danger of worshipping images themselves continued. During the 6th and 7th and 8th centuries, there were outbreaks of destruction of sacred art in churches. A man called John of Damascus in the early 8th century wrote, though, what became a classic argument defending sacred images as a fundamental way of teaching Christian faith. John of Damascus argued that in Christ, God became visible. So depicting the divine is made possible. John of Damascus clarified that worship is for God alone, but it is possible to venerate an image that directs us to God. In the late 8th century AD, matters for the whole church were settled for a while when an ecumenical council held in Nicaea decided in favour of these arguments of John of Damascus, agreeing that as the word became flesh, so wood and paint could be used to encourage faith and pay witness to the incarnation. Before we move on a bit, I just want us to think a bit more about this Christian tradition of painting the sacred, because we can sometimes just miss how audacious this is. Because fundamentally, artists seek to do an impossible thing, which is to depict God who is utterly beyond our human comprehension. This most famous of all images by Michelangelo depicts from the book of Genesis the creation story, God giving life to Adam, not breathing life into him in this version, but by touching his finger. Here is God the Father on the right, with the appearance of a human body. Now we know that that's impossible. God doesn't have a flesh and blood body. God is eternal and ineffable and immortal and everything we are not. No image can describe or contain God. So what justifies what's called the audacity of the Christian tradition of painting and the sacred is essentially that argument of John of Damascus, that God chooses to reveal himself to us in signs and symbols, and Scripture has many of these signs and symbols. And God reveals himself most fully in the incarnation of Jesus Christ, the Word made flesh. God reveals himself in the created world, and humanity responds by being creative and making things themselves in the material world. However, when you think about it, when it comes to depicting Jesus Christ, there are no contemporary descriptions or pictures of him. No one knows what the earthly Jesus looked like. So when artists depict him, they tend to paint someone who looks rather like them, from their time and their place. So here, Christ is painted in the likeness of other races. Here we have Christ from Korea and a Christ from Africa. There is an audacity in this. We do not know what the earthly Jesus looked like. But there is also a revelation in that when artists depict Christ looking like them, they are revealing to us again that Jesus is like us. Jesus became like us so we could be like him. But let's go back now to history and that ecumenical council of Nicaea, where after which, in the 8th century, the Western Church saw a flowering of the arts. This beautiful sculpture is all that remains of a medieval sculpture of Mary with the baby Jesus from Winchester Cathedral. Now, if you look carefully, I hope you can see just a little hint of red paint under her left arm, just on her gown, just behind her cloak, which reminds us statues in medieval England were painted. This is a very different aesthetic to what we are used to today. Medieval church interiors, where there was an absolute flowering of art, could be very brightly painted, bright wall paintings and coloured wood and painted stone statues, stained glass with the sun shining in. I think that it's hard for us to imagine that medieval aesthetic in churches. But by the 16th century, there were seismic religious, political, and aesthetic changes coming, and reform advanced across Europe. Standing here in this beautiful priory church, we're not far from that dramatic and destructive effects of the Reformation. In 1536, when Henry VIII broke with the church in Rome, he began the dissolution of the monasteries, and the change was rapid. In just a few years, all the religious foundations such as this would be physically dismantled, and their considerable assets and land and wealth would be seized by the crown. Change was really swift and ruthless. I wonder what it was like living through this. And sometimes this has just been put down to Henry's desire to grasp hold of all the wealth of the monasteries. I'm sure that played a part. Sometimes this kind of thing has been portrayed as vandalism, but there were really, really deep undercurrents. So here is a painting which I think is quite a visceral piece of anti-Roman Catholic, anti-papal propaganda. This painting is in our royal collection to this day and is very violent. What we see here, the four men standing represent the gospel writers Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're all holding heavy stones, and they are stoning the Pope and his two acolytes, and the two acolytes are avarice and hypocrisy. It's quite shocking, isn't it? The violence and the bitterness in that image, which was painted for the king and is still in the royal collection now. Thank goodness our own king kneels and prays with the Pope. We've come a little way since then. The break with Rome was intended to break with what was regarded as spiritual and moral corruption of the old religion, which put mortal souls in danger. It was that dangerous, what they were talking about. The theological impetus of Reformation saw a new emphasis on the Word of God. Holy words were to replace images. For reformers like Calvin, the second commandment was understood to require the total destruction of all religious images in churches. The destruction took place in fits and starts. At first, King Henry was quite lenient towards visual art, but later, under Edward VI, an authorised systematic and total destruction was supposed to take place. Queen Mary had a brief reign after this, and sacred images reappeared in churches, but they were removed again under Elizabeth I. Just two notable examples of change under Henry VIII I wanted to show you quickly. This is the amazing great screen in Winchester Cathedral, which was built in the 15th century, which would have been covered in brightly painted sculptures. What you see there now is Victorian sculptures. The original sculptures would have been brightly painted, and Christ at the centre would have been covered in gold and gemstones. All of them were removed and destroyed. The bodies of the sculptures, the saints and the apostles and the angels, were used as building material. The heads, the decapitated heads, are still stored by the cathedral, and it's a jolly eerie sight when you see them. Also at Binham Priory in Norfolk, if you go into the beautiful priory, similar to this in some ways, you'll see that the beautiful rood screen has been painted over with whitewash. This was done during the reign of Henry VIII, and black Bible scripture was written over the top. However, 500 years later, you can see that that whitewash paint is failing. And so the original medieval figures underneath are re-emerging, and this figure is of the resurrected Christ. Now, scholars differ as to whether these reforms were imposed from above or embraced by the populace hungry for change. We don't know. Every community would have been affected by the dramatic changes in their church buildings. Before the Reformation, worship involved all the senses. But after the great reforms, churches were much more plain, and worship focused on words and on the intellect. A century later, during and after the English Civil War, the radical Puritans aimed to finally complete what the earlier reformers had begun. The campaign of Puritan destruction was comprehensive and highly administered. Parliament passed ordinances banning just about everything, including all visual images, crucifixes, plain crosses, organs and vestments, angels, inscriptions invoking prayers, chancel rails, and communion tables. They were all to be removed and demolished, and pity the poor church wardens, because it was often their job to do this. Contemporary reports of the destruction betray a tremendous level of violence. For example, in 1641, Sir Robert Harley of Wigmore in Hereford had to see to the removal of a stone cross. One of those large stone crosses. It was pulled down, hacked with a sledgehammer to dust, and then laid on the footpath in the churchyard to be trodden on. It's quite difficult to conceive of this, I think. Symbols and images were subjected not just to violence, but also to degradation. This state-sanctioned image breaking came to an end with the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, after which church decoration gradually revived. So in the 18th and 19th centuries, it gradually revived, and indeed we have evidence of some of that in this church. But art had shifted decisively from public religious spaces to private domestic ones. England never again developed a strong tradition of church-sponsored visual art, as we see in Catholic Italy or Spain. But now let's turn to the present and to visual art in the church today. The church is called to proclaim the gospel afresh in each generation, and I'm particularly interested in how visual art can be a partner in this mission today. There is a great challenge. The Church of England is called to serve the nation, yet its ministry is simply not touching many people. Many young people have no experience of church and scant knowledge of Christian teaching. Many people have never been inside a church and really need a clear invitation to have interest or confidence to come in. And it's important that they do. There are lots of ways of doing mission, but I do want to defend the importance of our buildings. Christian buildings are powerful signs of the presence of God among his people today. Our buildings are signs of life of Christian community. People who come in can experience welcome and hospitality and can encounter all sorts of evidence of worship and the life of faith. In my experience, as vicar of parishes in West Yorkshire and as dean in Birmingham and Winchester cathedrals, art exhibitions and installations are one of the ways the church can engage with people who would otherwise never come in across the threshold. So here's a beautiful sculpture by Anthony Gormley in the crypt of Winchester Cathedral. There's a growing confidence that the visual arts can offer people of all ages and backgrounds new and profound experiences in our churches. What we see can reveal what would be difficult to put into words and can resonate and move us and enable us to explore meaning and purpose. The eye can still educate the mind and can still open the soul. And hosting an art exhibition in a sacred space enables us to offer what might be a precious opportunity for people to pay attention and look rather than simply glance. In the rush of modern life, bombarded with rapidly changing images on our screens, we can give space to turn aside, to move beyond instant reaction and take time to reflect. Churches can provide space for the work of the Holy Spirit, which is at the heart of my motivation for engaging with this work. Art in sacred spaces can offer experiences that are revelatory and resonant. This work is from Durham Cathedral, which was part of a city light festival and shone light on their heritage of mining. Yes, using miners' vests. That's what's hanging in the wonderful heights of Durham Cathedral, filled with light. And this work resonated with local people and encouraged them to come over the threshold to go into their cathedral, created space for profound experience and invited reflection on life and mortality, sacrifice and hope. It's not specifically religious, but in its cathedral setting, it's full of meaning and value. In my experience, what art in church can provoke is a holy exercise in mutual hospitality. The church or the cathedral offers its space and its time and an unconditional welcome, which is a sign of God's welcome. But the hospitality is mutual because the visitor is being hospitable too. Firstly, they come into the sacred space which may be strange to them. And secondly, they willingly give the artwork time and attention. Hospitality of time and space is mutual. There are lots of ways that churches can do this and engage with visual art. Most simply, churches can host exhibitions of work by local artists, including children, or the work of professional artists, such as here, Lawrence Edwards. Artist residencies can be offered and are often very fruitful. And if there's a budget, new permanent work can be commissioned. Visual art in sacred space need not be explicitly religious in its subject, but must have integrity and a purpose that resonates with the teachings of the church. Art can also surprise and provoke questions, making new connections with the viewer. Historic buildings connect us with the past and our shared heritage. But when contemporary art is introduced sensitively into older buildings, there's a real clarity and confidence that the building is alive and well today. In a recent refurbishment of St. Martin in the Fields in London, this bold contemporary window was installed within a neoclassical Baroque-style church. And this is an image of art staged as performance or installation. Perhaps you've seen something like this where the images, I can't show you precisely, but they're moving images of a light installation, which offer what's sometimes referred to as an immersive experience, which seems particularly appropriate in buildings which were, after all, designed to be physically and psychologically overwhelming. Here is another still from a light installation by Lux Moralis in Winchester Cathedral. And in my experience, a light show does many things. They bring people into church for the first time in a way that isn't too intimidating. It enables them then to connect with the heritage of their surroundings, and also I find their own interior life, their feelings, their memories. People light votive candles. They speak with clergy and volunteers. They experience awe and wonder in the place. Profound things can happen. These are not just entertainments. Another type of installation is that of an artist-led and community-created work. This was the type of art that caused controversy in Canterbury Cathedral. Before we come to that, I'd just like to quickly show you an installation of this type which was created for Birmingham Cathedral while I was there as Dean in 2015. This is Soul Boats, the work of artist Jake Lever. It was a really beautiful piece composed of about 2,000 little boats. A golden flotilla suspended high above the nave. You can see it's a small cathedral with a balcony, and these were suspended high above. The golden flotilla was suspended there, and it reflected back to us what went on below, and it bobbed slightly when eddies of warm air rose to it. Soul Boats was created through wide engagement across the city. Using these beautiful templates at workshops held in schools and other community spaces, Jake Lever, the artist, led people through. And clergy and volunteers worked in tents outside the cathedral. That was me. I took that photo one day when I was helping. And what people did was we invited them to write or draw inside the interior of the boats what was important to them and to offer this to God. Then they'd cut the boats out from the templates, and they were lifted high up. And so all that had been written or drawn inside the boats was, so to speak, private between them and God. But from below, we saw the beauty of the offering, each soul a little golden boat. Now, we didn't know the faith background of the participants, but we did know, because the artist had worked it out, that the front 3 boats of the installation had been done, one by a Christian, one by a Jewish young person, and one by a Muslim young person. So this was quietly and discreetly an interfaith, intercultural offering. The congregation loved this. They didn't want it taken down. We didn't receive a single complaint, and the artist won an award. So, off to Canterbury and another artist-led, community-created installation that fared rather differently. The intention of the exhibition that ran from October through to January this year at Canterbury was to enable local groups of people to take space in their cathedral, to make their mark, and for their questions to God to be seen and heard. And by this, the cathedral was demonstrating that both the cathedral and God was listening to them. The work was intended to build bridges and had been generated from workshops run by the cathedral with the poet Alex Vellis, with people from minority communities. These included ethnic minorities, LGBTQI communities, and people with neurodivergence. And together they generated questions they would like to ask God. Their questions were presented as graffiti, but because the cathedral didn't want to damage the ancient stones, the graffiti wasn't spray painted, heaven forbid. It was applied on vinyl stickers, which had been rigorously tested to check that they wouldn't damage the stone either. I'm sharing these photos as they appeared in the press and on social media, and they sparked great controversy across broadcast media and social media, seemingly across the world. Certainly, this story was reported in the South China Morning Post. Sadly, there was a disconnect between the intention of the work and how it landed with many people. Many people found these images that they were seeing not just provocative, but offensive. Some people felt that the ancient and sacred building had been vandalized. Now, for the cathedral to work with its communities in this way is tried and tested, as I've explained, and the content generated, I don't think would have been in the least bit controversial were it not for this style of presentation, this graffiti. It was the graffiti that caused the scandal. The Dean of Canterbury, David Monteith, explained that the style had been chosen carefully with purpose, was meant to be noticed. He said, "We could have easily rendered the questions to God as medieval-style calligraphy, neatly hung on canvases, but they would have gone unnoticed and unremarked upon. Whereas they wanted people to hear and engage with the questions that had been asked." Dean David also said that there is a rawness which is magnified by the graffiti style, which is disruptive. There's also an authenticity to what is said because it's unfiltered and not tidied up or sanitized. We've had a while now to think about this, and I'd like to offer a couple of reflections. Firstly, that the way that we receive our news today gives visual images a particular power. Many of us, particularly younger generations, receive news and content frequently, even continually through their screens that they have with them. They ping up all the time and get our attention. News and content providers want our attention, so eye-catching images like I've shown you do just that. Millions of people saw these images. Millions. Images that give an instant impression that we can react to, but without context or nuance. What wasn't conveyed well in the photos, I felt, was scale. In reality, the graffiti was dwarfed by the cathedral context. It was carefully made not to harm the building and carefully placed so as not to disrupt worship. Photos didn't really communicate that. The exhibition was powerful, but it was also thoughtful, carefully curated, and temporary. But that was not the instant impression. And it's certainly the case that lots of us dislike graffiti, see it as vandalism, and consider it's not well placed in a sacred building. But I heard a volunteer from Canterbury Cathedral who'd spent time with the exhibition, interviewed on the BBC, saying, "The exhibition has got me thinking. Normally, I can't stand graffiti, but I am coming round to it now." The volunteer had had opportunity to look and reflect, find the resonances for him. And this is what art in church allows. And I think I share the same opinion as him. I don't normally like graffiti, but I came round to this. I found it had something to reveal. One thing the graffiti reveals to me is my own aesthetic expectations in church and how I respond when these are disruptive. If I'm intolerant or angry about disruption, I may miss something important, because Scripture reveals clearly to us Jesus is a significant disruptor of the social and religious order. Time and again, Jesus sacrificed respectability and purity for inclusion. And this infuriated people. The Dean of Canterbury, the curator, and the artist sacrificed respectability of style for inclusion. And if I can suspend my dislike of graffiti and receive it as an expression of those who are not normally heard in the cathedral, I can see that the embrace of the cathedral, its generous hospitality, is a good thing, a Christ-like thing. If the church is to be bold in serving and welcoming the nation, then we need to be disrupted sometimes. And a further reflection is that, is that back? A further reflection is that the news story was picked up by those who promote the idea that Western civilization is in decline and that British heritage is under attack in the culture war. In his platform X, Elon Musk wrote about this exhibition, "Many people in the West want to destroy their own culture." Unfortunately, in the noise and fury of the reaction, the view that inclusion and tolerance are central to British heritage and culture because of Christianity was hard to hear. It was a painful irony that an exhibition intended to promote inclusion provoked huge intolerance online. Those involved in its making were on the receiving end of significant abuse. But to draw this lecture to a close on a less controversial note, I'd like to share a final beautiful example of cathedral art reaching out into its community. In 2018, the city of Salisbury was shaken by the murder of two local people, father and daughter, by Russian agents using the nerve agent Novichok. It was really shocking and terrible for everyone concerned. Local leaders sought to bring people together with arts and cultural events to allow mourning and bring healing to the city. The cathedral in Salisbury hosted a community-created installation, Les Colombes, by artist Michael Pendry as you see here, a wonderful flock of origami doves, a beautiful murmuration in the great nave of the cathedral. I went to see it in Salisbury and was very moved to find out that not only were the white origami doves in the cathedral, but they were also suspended in the windows of shops and houses. The official installation had broken out from the cathedral walls and been unofficially extended through the city. People found the doves profoundly meaningful and wanted to have signs of hope in their homes and businesses. It mattered to them. What started in the cathedral, a great community artwork expressing hope. In conclusion, the visual arts have always been central to the ministry of the Church and to the communication of Christian beliefs and revealing its truths, and controversy has never been far away. Concerns about idolatry that racked the Church for so many centuries may now seem like a thing of the past. But this study has alerted me to how concerns may still be relevant. There can still be dangers, it seems to me, in focusing on and valuing material and visual objects for themselves, rather than for what they direct us towards, what they reveal about humanity and God. Recognizing that the visual arts matter just as much as ever, particularly in the way that they can connect with modern people, otherwise untouched by the Church. I really believe we must continue to work with the visual arts, particularly that enable some engagement and encourage sustained looking and paying attention. To look and pay attention in our modern world is precious. Art can open eyes and minds and hearts to revelation and to resonance with a wider vision of humanity and even to the reality of God. We may, through looking at art in a sacred space, sense something of the divine and grasp the heel of heaven. Thank you. Teaching device in the life of the Church. But you know, there are certain works of art that just move people. I heard a curator say that in the enormous painting of Water Lilies by Claude Monet, she has seen people just sit there for a long period of time weeping. They are finding a deep meaning in it. We don't know what the artist was wanting to convey, but something is conveyed that makes people weep. And so I think probably art that means something to us, if we think about it, probably something is being revealed to us and resonating with us. But I'm sure there's lots of art that doesn't carry a clear meaning.
I've now got the microphone working, so would anyone else like to ask a question? Joyce.
Thank you. In the Gospel, there's an episode where a woman comes and pours expensive ointment over Christ's feet, and Judas notoriously remarks this money would have been better spent and given to the poor. How would you respond to those who object to the large expenditure by a church or a cathedral on a work of contemporary art?
Yes. Oscar Wilde once said, "The cynic knows the cost of everything and the value of nothing." So I think in the Christian church, sometimes, if something has clearly been a big labor of love and may have cost a lot of money, it can be a powerful witness to values, what is valued and treasured. But of course, we always have to weigh up the needs of people as well as the needs of worship. But while we possibly can, we must attend to both. And I've found when something's been made by a community and is beautiful and has obviously taken time and effort, it is a powerful witness to other people about what faith means. That faith means you love something enough to make a big effort for it. And that is a powerful effort, a powerful witness. And you're not having to try to share doctrine or bash people over the head with it. It just is a huge witness to what we care about. And I think, working in Winchester Cathedral, you couldn't sneeze without it costing £250,000. The sums of money are ridiculous, but it's a labour of love, keeping it up and looking after it as it is. Finding money for new work is very difficult. But you know, a lot of art is relatively inexpensive. I'm always amazed at how inexpensive it is to work with an artist for a week. They do it for love as well, a lot of the time. And I think it can be a powerful witness for today. Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else would like to ask a question? Yes, Sue.
Thank you. Just a comment about our church in Kirby Malham. We have an art exhibition there every year, and the first time we had one of the artists who was a photographer who was not used to exhibiting in a sacred space commented on the quality of conversations that people had when they came in to look at the art. And he said people were just very quickly talking about really deep issues of life and meaning and all sorts of things. And from then, the group of artists have been very keen to exhibit, I think, for that sort of reason. And very few of them are actually people who would go to church any other time, but they see art in a sacred space as something that enriches life and enables conversations and connections. And I think that's this is something you've been talking about here.
Our buildings have an amazing effect.
Yes.
And artists love exhibiting in churches because it just gives them additional profound layers that they're working with.
Yes.
And also to see how their work works. This is where buildings are just wonderful.
There's a local blacksmith who exhibits, and she says she thinks the light and the building enhances her work.
Yes.
And she realises that her work enhances the building as well. There's a real partnership. Thank you.
Anyone else would like to ask Catherine a question?
Or just make any sort of...
Would anyone like to comment their observations?
I want, when people have had a chance to think about it, you'll see me at other occasions. Tell me what your favourite paintings are, or your favourite works of art. I'll be really interested to know. Well,
Catherine, can I thank you enormously for that very interesting and informative lecture, and a fantastic follow-on from the great St. Cuthbert lectures that since I've been here. We've had very distinguished speakers, and you're very much in that tradition. Today, I should just say here at Bolton Priory, we are recipients, of course, of great artistic revivals. This church is an Anglo-Catholic revival. If you'd come here before George Street, you wouldn't have had those paintings on the east wall. You wouldn't have the reordering of the interior of this church. It would have been far more austere. So we too are recipients, and at that moment in time we were also blessed with these Pugin windows, which are fantastic. So we've done our bit over time to adorn the beauty of this place, and also in stark contrast to its monastic roots. No monk, thinking about the design here originally, would have foreseen these wonderful windows which were put here in the 1870s by the 6th Duke of Devonshire. So we too are a living witness to what you've been saying in your lecture today. So thank you once again, Catherine. I should just say, if you'd like to speak to Catherine, please do so after the lecture. She's also preaching tomorrow, as it's Mothering Sunday, so we'll welcome you back in the morning. So I'd just like to finish off, please, by doing another round of applause for Catherine in appreciation of her lovely lecture. Thank you. Thank you very much.